I had been walking for what seemed like forever when the church finally came into view. I was in the Tinker Creek Valley, tucked deep into the Blue Ridge Mountains near the Virginia-West Virginia border. Now, I'd hiked in the area before, but as soon as I heard about Isaiah's church, I knew I had to go back. Now, you might already know who I am. I run a popular social media account where I take photos of abandoned places. And fortunately, here in Appalachia, we have a lot of those forgotten mines, crumbling old hospitals, overgrown amusement parks, and churches. Well, tons of churches. I was at the local library researching an abandoned mine when I came across references to Isaiah's church in the Tinker Creek Valley. Apparently, a group of ultra-religious folks followed a sign from God to build a church in that valley in the early 1900s. They didn't build a whole settlement or even extra houses. They just built the church. A reverend named Isaiah Porter led the group and oversaw the construction of the church. Over the years, it became more of a legend than a verified location. There was an article from 1908 about the group called Isaiah's Children, following their so-called sign from the heavens to build the church in the valley. There was another article about a local politician saying he worshipped at Isaiah's church. Another article mentioned a funeral that took place there, but most of the articles were much later on in the 20th century, about local legends and forgotten places. I thought it was a perfect place to feature on my page, so I left a little before sunrise on a chilly September morning. I didn't know how long it was going to take me to find this church, especially with the only vague description that it was in the lowest part of the valley where Tinker Creek met Appleton Ridge. I found Tinker Creek and Appleton Ridge on a map, but the problem was, there was no place where they met. So I decided I'd go to the nearest part of Tinker Creek near the ridge to see if there was any kind of tributary that led away from the creek. And lo and behold, there was a long indentation in the ground where I could tell there used to be another branch of the creek. It had dried up over the years, and with new maps, it had become another forgotten feature of the area. So I followed the indentation in the ground, but I kept losing the path. It was so overgrown that I could barely track it. Hours went by and the sun advanced toward the center of the sky. Not a great time for photos. A little after noon, with my head spinning from trying to follow this creek that was no longer a creek, I finally saw it. The steeple peeked from the trees like a periscope, and a creeping thought in my head wondered whether the church saw me before I saw it. I snapped a photo of the steeple, which was topped with a white cross rising between the trees. Then I kept going, following the cross like a north star. As I got closer to the church, I was surprised at how lush and almost tropical the plants around me became. I recognized some of them as plants that only grew in volcanic soil. These were the kinds of brightly colored flowers and leaves you might see in Hawaii, not in Virginia. And by the time I reached the church, I was shoving aside ferns and vines like I was in a jungle. I shoved one final bush out of my way and saw the church standing tall before me. To my surprise, the white paint looked fresh. The brown wood of the doors seemed newly polished. The winds were unbroken and clear. Most of the churches I photograph are hollowed out husks of what they used to be. They usually have 3.5 walls and a collapsed roof. Their windows have been broken for so long that even the shattered glass had been buried by time. They're places of rot and reminders of the fact that nature always overtakes our accomplishments, holy or unholy. But Isaiah's church was pristine. It was like it was still holding weekly services. I walked around it and took a few photos, knowing I need to wait a couple of hours to get good evening light to make the photos really pop. I ate my lunch sitting on the front steps of the church. I didn't want to go inside quite yet. I ate my sandwich and carrots and tossed my crumbs to whatever animals were out there. And looking out into the lush greenery around me, I almost expected a leopard to leap out of the foliage and roar at me. But everything was quiet, almost perfectly quiet. I remembered why I didn't hear any birds. I spent a lot of time alone in remote places. I have extra food and water. I have a headlamp and a flashlight and extra batteries for both. I have bear spray. I have a satellite telephone. I tell a friend where I'm going and approximately when I'll be back. But still, I felt unprepared for what was inside that church, and I couldn't exactly put a finger on why. I climbed the 3 or 4 steps up to the door and pulled the handle. The door swung silently open. The inside of the church was pristine. The pews glistened. The floorboards were swept. Instead of smelling mold and animal crap, I smelled the light fragrance of an unlit candle, and I wondered how recently it had been lit. A large stone cross hung on the far wall behind the wooden pulpit. Carved into the pulpit was a symbol I didn't recognize. There were 8 circles, 2 rows of 4, within a pentagonal shape that looked like a house. I walked around and took photos, still feeling like I had stepped into something that was complex and dangerous. The church was impressive, but far from ornate. Everything in there was simple, but it had all been made out of the materials the mountains and valleys supplied. There was nothing gold or glittery in the place. It was a common place seemingly designed for common people. I had no idea how uncommon the place really was. That is, until I saw an X on the wall. Like the cross at the front of the church, it was made out of stone. I could tell it had been chiseled roughly, perhaps in a hurry. It almost looked like a cross tilted 45 degrees. Now, I never disturb the abandoned sites I visit if I can help it, other than opening a door or climbing over something. I never move items around or adjust the surroundings for my photos. I want the place to be as authentic and untouched as possible. But something about this X on the wall was calling to me. I felt a pull to turn the X just a little bit to align it back into a cross shape. And I swear I could feel 2 fingers push into the soft spots under my eyes, behind my jaw, and pull me toward the X. I'd never felt anything like that before. My torso leaned forward and my legs followed. I reached out and turned the X until it stood straight up in the shape of a cross. But then the floor opened up. There was a great grinding and shaking in the ground beneath me, and I heard wood screaming against wood as the door opened up in the floor. The door was just in front of the pulpit. I walked cautiously over to it, again drawn to the opening like I'd been drawn to the X on the wall. I stood above the opening and I saw a staircase descending into the darkness. Well, it wasn't total darkness though. You see, somewhere down there was a dull, multicolored glow, like a string of faded Christmas lights. My chest burned with fear, but my mind was calm for some reason. I raised my camera and took a photo of the opening in the floor. Then I walked down the stairs. With each step I took, the multicolored glow became brighter. There were maybe 10 or 15 steps, and by the time I got to the bottom, that whole chamber was lit. Now, what I'm about to describe will sound insane, but I need you to believe me. I need someone to believe me. I need to tell this story so that you don't make the same mistakes I made. In the middle of that subterranean chamber was a large figure, probably 9 feet tall, seated in a throne. Now, I'm just going to call it he, even though I know this was not a human and did not have any sexual characteristics. He barely had any characteristics at all, in fact. He had no face. His head was shaped like a human head, though it tapered to a point at the top. The head was as smooth as the polished wood of the pews in the sanctuary above. The rest of his body was entirely featureless and was a smooth gray color, except for his hands. Each hand had, for, well, lack of a better description, 4 fingers. Each finger came to a bulbous end, like neon lollipops. I say neon because each bulbous end of his fingers glowed a different beautiful color. They carried each of the 7 colors of the rainbow, and one more color that I could hardly describe. It wasn't a mix of any of our colors, and it doesn't fall on any kind of spectrum I've ever seen. It was the color of how it feels to be held by someone you used to be close to, but who you've grown apart from. It was warm but painfully nostalgic, and it gave me feelings of regret. I took a photo, of course. I took many photos. I captured this being from every angle, though I was afraid to get within an arm's length of him. The closer I got, the brighter the colors became. The room was roughly the same size as the small chapel, with stone walls, floor, and ceiling. The walls were covered in carvings, not dissimilar from cave paintings, or perhaps like the Stations of the Cross, as this is a story about a church after all. But the images clearly told a story. The story started back in the corner with the numeral 1 above it. The black and white carving depicted a quiet valley with a streaking star overhead, or so I thought. The second carving revealed that the shooting star was actually some kind of falling object from the sky, and it crash-landed into the valley. The meteor, or whatever it was, cracked open after it landed. The carving depicting this event showed an explosion of colors coming from the cracks in the meteor. Rivulets of red came rushing out as well, setting fire to the portion of the valley it landed in. Standing amid the cracked open meteor was a figure with no face and brightly colored hands. I turned to look at the thing in the chair, then back to the carvings. Humans came to meet the mysterious man from the sky. They bowed down before him, welcoming him as a god. They built him a throne and a monument. They danced and worshipped as their god waved at them with his beautiful hands. But one day something started happening to the humans in the carvings. They went from happy to sad. They turned on each other, killing and dismembering their neighbors. And as time went on, the survivors of these bloody deeds began to lose their facial features. Their ears dropped off, their noses collapsed, their eyes and mouths closed up and disappeared. And one of these poor souls escaped. They fled the valley on a night with no moon and went to a nearby town. They wrote their story down for a man with blazing eyes and long black hair. The man with long black hair collected a large group of people and marched them into the valley. These newcomers wore helmets or masks as they swept in and attacked the god. They toppled the monument and used some kind of rock or mineral to trap the god in a small space. Then they walled him up and buried him, and they built a church on top of him. The final section of the wall was not a picture, but a paragraph, and it read this: "Leave this place. Tell no one. The cursed god before you is trapped in this space. It is held here by these carvings, which remind it of its capture. Do not listen to the cursed god. Its secrets are too terrible to see, too awful to hear, too horrible to tell. Leave this place. Tell no one." I raised my camera and I took a photo of the words. I looked back at the carvings elsewhere on the wall and was amazed to see that they were moving. The god in the carvings looked alive, slowly floating in the air. Then I realized that the images on the wall weren't moving at all. The lights were. I looked to the throne and saw the thing stretching his bright fingers out. He looked stiff, like he hadn't moved in years. And maybe he hadn't. The staircase back up into the church was on the far side of the room, and the cursed god, if that's what he truly was, sat between me and the exit. He knew I was there. I could tell he knew. He couldn't see or hear or smell, but something in him sensed my presence. Maybe his fingers grew warmer as they grew brighter. I'm not sure. The cursed god stood from his throne. His sharp head almost scraped the stone ceiling. He stretched his back and fingers. Then, still facing the stairs, the god reached backwards. The glowing ends of his fingers pointed at me like multicolored eyes. I understood the symbol on the pulpit upstairs. 2 rows of 4 circles enclosed in the house, or church, as it were. I leaned forward, just as I had done in the church with the X on the wall, like the god's glowing hands were pulling me in. He started to communicate with me. I didn't hear his words as much as I felt them. It's like trying to describe the new color. Can't exactly explain it because I've never experienced a sensation like that before. It was like it was implanting a new memory in my head in real time. He asked me if I wanted to know the history of the world. He asked if I wanted to know where it all came from, where all of life, where all of creation comes from. I said I wasn't sure. I couldn't tell if I was speaking out loud or if I was sending messages back to him in my head. I know my whole body tingled with terror and elation. It was like the descent on a roller coaster's big drop. He asked me again, this time more forcefully. He told me that these are the questions mankind had always sought, and that I was a fool to not accept. But I was horrified of what I might learn. I thought about the words carved into the wall, about the god having secrets that were too terrible to see. But I was weak. I was curious. Sometimes there's no difference between the two. Yes, I said to him. Yes, I want to know where it all comes from. And then he showed me. I should have heeded the warning on the wall, my head filled with images I can barely describe. Bubbling ooze that looked like blood, great hungry mouths dripping with gore and rotten flesh, bloodshot eyes with irises of stardust and black holes for pupils. I felt the greed of the ever-expanding universe that was hell-bent on consuming all the nothingness around it. My blood boiled with the fury of countless generations. There was no joy in this tale of creation, only avarice and hunger, bloodlust and gluttony. I have no idea how long I was under the cursed god's spell before Isaiah's children saved me. 1 second I was enveloped in those horrifying visions, and the next I was being dragged up the stairs by people in robes. They wore helmets that looked like welders' masks. Maybe it was to block them from seeing the god's lights. They pulled me up into the church and closed the door in the floor. They asked me if I knew my name, if I knew the year, if I knew what planet I was on. It took me a few moments to remember all of it. I remembered if the visions I had seen were a dream, or if my whole life had been dreamt up until that point. I was trapped between 2 realities, neither of which seemed real. After some amount of time, they walked me outside. It was daytime, which meant that either no time had passed, or a full night had passed. I wasn't sure which. Hell, I was still trying to figure out what year it was. Isaiah's children led me through the lushy greenery that surrounded the church. They made me promise to never come back there. And I promised. I stumbled back to Tinker's Creek and to the hiking trail, slowly clawing my way back up to reality. But I could never see the world the same. I saw what the trees were before they sprouted. I saw what the mountains were before they rose from the earth. I saw what the rain was before it was water. Words can't describe it, only feelings. It was like my whole world was that new color I'd never seen before. I felt nostalgic and warm, yet terrified all at once. I'm still terrified, all these weeks later. Isaiah's children implored me never to tell this story, but I had to write it down. I know I'm breaking my promise to them, but I have to tell this tale and warn you. I can't prove that any of this is real. The photos I took on my camera were all deleted, and I think one of Isaiah's children deleted them. All the while, another of them was asking me if I knew my name. I've gone back to that valley and tried to rediscover the path to the church, but I hadn't been able to find it, and I was starting to think maybe it was all just a dream. It wasn't until last week, when my ear started becoming loose. It was like losing baby teeth as a kid. My right ear started to get a little loose on the side of my head, and then it got looser, and then it fell right off. Then my ear canal started sealing up, and then the same thing happened to my other ear. I went to the hospital and they were baffled. They passed me around from doctor to doctor, especially when my nose started shrinking. They even referred me to priests and spiritualists. None of them had been able to help me. The only people who could help me are Isaiah's children. If anybody could save me, they can. I'm going back to the Tinker Creek Valley tomorrow, and I'm not leaving until I find them, or they find me. I know I'm breaking my promise to them, but I don't know what else to do. It won't be long before my eyes and mouth are sealed up, and I can already feel my right eyelid getting a little sticky. I have to push it back open sometimes when I blink. But first, I'm writing my own story down here and posting it online as a warning to others. Don't be like me. Heed this warning. Believe these words. Do not seek out Isaiah's church. Don't even go hiking in Tinker Creek Valley. And if you ever find yourself with the chance to learn the secrets of the universe, don't take that chance. Some things are better left unknown.